early morning in Los Angeles. As the streets slowly came to life, Jim Carrey walked into his usual corner cafe to grab a coffee. As he pushed open the wooden door, his eyes landed on a familiar sight. Outside, leaning against the wall, sat a young girl. She wore an old, dirty hoodie and torn jeans. Her thick, unkempt hair fell over her shoulders. In her hands was a worn-out brush, which she used to silently clean the shoes of passing customers. No one seemed to notice her presence. Jim walked inside, placed his order, but his thoughts lingered on the girl outside. How long had she been there? How long had she been alone? A few minutes later, he stepped back outside, holding a coffee and a sandwich. The girl was so lost in her task that she didn't even notice Jim approaching. "Jim, good morning, sweetheart. Are you hungry?" The girl's head shot up. She looked at Jim with a mix of surprise, fear, and a hint of embarrassment, but the way she hesitated, then slightly nodded, made it clear she was starving. "Maya, yeah." Jim extended the sandwich toward her. She hesitated for a moment, but finally took it. Her small hands trembled as she held it. The moment she took the first bite, her eyes closed, as if she hadn't tasted food like this in a long time. Jim crouched down to her level. "Jim, what's your name?" The girl hesitated before answering in a soft voice. "Maya." "Maya?" Jim nodded. "Jim. I'm Jim. Nice to meet you, Maya." What Jim didn't know at that moment was that this wasn't just an introduction. This was the beginning of one of the most important stories of his life. As Jim continued talking to Maya, the little girl's story weighed heavier and heavier on his heart. She had practically grown up on the streets. Her father had left before she was born. Her mother had died of an illness when she was just 7. Since then, she had never truly had a home. She had stayed in shelters, slept beside strangers, or curled up alone under bridges, searching for a place to keep warm. But the worst part? No one ever noticed her. People walked past her without a second glance. Some turned their heads away, others avoided eye contact, as if even acknowledging her existence was too much. Jim couldn't understand it. In a city filled with millions, why was no one seeing this little girl? Maya absent-mindedly turned an empty coffee cup in her hands and whispered, "Maya, people don't look. It's like I don't exist." Jim's throat tightened, because he knew exactly what that felt like. He had been in Maya's place once, struggling, uncertain, alone. He thought back to his own childhood. There was a time when he and his family had been forced to live in their car. Back then, no one had looked at them either. "Jim, you know, I've been through tough times too. When I was a kid, my family had to live in our car." Maya's head snapped up. She stared at Jim for a long moment, as if trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. "Maya, you lived on the streets?" "Jim, life can change, sweetheart, but not alone. Someone has to reach out to you." Maya took a deep breath. "Maya, no one helps me." Jim leaned in slightly, locking eyes with her. "Jim, you're wrong, because I'm here." Something shifted in Maya's expression. Those words, they were the most genuine thing she had heard in a long time, but Jim noticed something else. Maya was holding something back. "Jim, were you always alone, or was there someone with you?" Maya's face darkened. Her small fingers gripped an old worn bracelet. "Maya, I had a brother, but I lost him." Jim's heart ached. "Jim, you lost him?" Maya looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maya, he lived on the streets too, but he wasn't as strong as me. One morning I woke up, and he was gone." Jim lowered his head. He knew. Sometimes hunger, cold, and loneliness could steal a person away silently. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then, slowly, Maya unfastened the old bracelet. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph, a boy with a bright, innocent smile. "Maya, this is the only thing I have left to remember him by." Jim looked at the small picture, and in that moment, he made a decision. He wasn't leaving this girl behind. No matter what, he was going to change her life. That day, Jim Carrey took Maya into his car. "Jim, how about a little drive? There's a place I want to show you." Maya hesitated, but when she looked into Jim's eyes, she felt something, a sense of security, almost like a father's warmth. She climbed into the car, still unsure. Jim drove through the city, taking her to a place where the view was unlike anything she had ever seen. When they arrived, Maya stepped out cautiously. Her eyes widened in amazement as she gazed at the breathtaking view of Los Angeles. The golden sunlight bathed the skyline, making the entire city shimmer. "Maya, this is beautiful." Jim turned to her with a knowing smile. Jim, when I first came to this city, I had nothing. But I used to come up here, sit down, and look at these lights, imagining that one day my life would change. Maya lifted her head, studying Jim's face. Maya, and did it? Jim smiled. Jim, yes, but only because someone gave me a chance. And in that moment, Maya understood. Jim was ready to give her that same chance. As Jim drove Maya through the streets, she sat quietly in the passenger seat. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, betraying her nervousness. She had spent years surviving on the streets. Leaving that life behind was terrifying. Jim glanced at her, sensing her hesitation. Jim, I know change is scary, but trust me, you're going to be okay. After about 20 minutes, they pulled up in front of a large building. It wasn't just any shelter. This was a special center, one that Jim had been supporting for years, a place where kids could learn, heal, and create a future for themselves. Maya hesitated as she stepped out of the car. She stared at the massive glass windows, through which she could see children laughing, playing, and reading. The walls inside were covered in colorful murals, and the whole place felt warm. Nothing like the streets. Jim knelt beside her. Jim, how do you feel? Maya shrugged. Maya, weird, like I don't belong here. Jim placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Jim, let me tell you a secret. Big changes always feel scary at first, but fear doesn't mean you won't succeed. They stepped inside. Teachers, psychologists, and artists walked around, greeting children and offering words of encouragement. This wasn't just a shelter, it was a home. Maya felt out of place, but the warmth of the place was undeniable. A few children noticed her, smiling and waving. Jim walked up to the center's director and explained Maya's story. The staff welcomed her without hesitation. Jim, this place exists for kids like you. You'll learn, create, and grow here. You'll have a chance to dream. Maya lowered her gaze. It was hard to believe this was real. Maya, but can I really do this? Jim crouched to her eye level. Jim, instead of asking that, try asking, what can I accomplish? Maya's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, she truly considered a future. 1 year later, Maya was no longer the girl who slept in alleys and begged for scraps. She had spent the last year learning, growing, and finding herself. With Jim's support, she had discovered a love for art and theater. Even as a child, she had loved making people smile, just like Jim. One day, Jim returned to the center. Maya was on stage performing a comedy skit. The room was filled with laughter, her confidence shining as she made people laugh. Jim sat in the back, watching, eyes filled with pride. When the performance ended, Maya spotted him. She beamed and ran straight into his arms. Maya, I did it because of you. Jim shook his head. Jim, no, sweetheart. You did this yourself. I just reminded you of something you had forgotten. Maya tilted her head. Maya, what's that? Jim smiled warmly. Jim, to never forget to smile. And in that moment, Jim Carrey once again proved that one person really can change the world.